Hello, back again with me, Jufe or Lokollo. I'm here to once again explain my practicum, which is in this practicum from my multimedia class, we thought to explain that article which we have to build in HTML and CSS, which these two HTML and CSS have to work to be written in different file. Also, in the article, minimum we have to have three sub-tab, and in this sub-tab, we must have at least one paragraph and its explanation. Also, because my student ID number end with 60 is an odd number, so I have to use the dominant color of yellow, because that is one of the role in this practicum. And for the student that get otherwise, we'll use the color pop. Okay, now let's dive right into it. So, to make my project technically engaging and visually distinct, I decide to frame the academic content within a that kind of retro Y2K inspired operating system, specifically this reminiscence of the classic Windows 95, but completely overhauled with a deep yellow aesthetic to meet the design brief, which I had already discussed on the intro. Before diving into the code base, I will briefly outline the content of the article itself, which is divided into three core sub-chapters. The first chapters define multimedia, explaining how its transition from analog formats like printed books and television into the interactive digital computer graphics we recognize today. The second chapter explores the genesis of digital hardware, its highly early milestones like the arcade game, Pong, and tracks the intense computing revolutions of the late 1970s and the 80s, especially the introduction of the Apple Macintosh, which revolutionized graphical use interface and the subsequent dominance of Microsoft Windows. The final chapter focuses on software innovation. I discuss how the native graphic and audio capability of this operating system allowed companies like Macromedia to develop landmark programs like Director and Class, which paved the way for modern and interactive production. Okay, now moving to the technical architecture. I took a highly modular approach. Rather than just separate the HTML file and the CSS file, I used the PHP as the basis, and then I separate the HTML and CSS file. Here in my index.php file, you can see the overarching skeletal structure I have defined: the header, main, and footer. Semantic tags. However, instead of calling the article text here, I utilize a PIP include directive. This directive dynamically fetches the content of a separate content.html file. If you look at the content.html file, you will see it contains absolutely nothing but the pure unstyled article text, neatly defined using section, head2, and b tags. This separation of concern is a fundamental best practice in web development, making the code base much easier to maintain and for the visual presentation. Like I said before, is handled entirely by separate externals. I see it. This is where the red to white to aesthetic and the yellow color treatment are aesthetic. Achieve the classic text upload as the global body we're going to deep indigo. The application window themselves use a classic system. The most crucial part of this retro design is the illusion of 3D beverages on the windows. I achieved this by roughly manipulating the border of the window container glass by setting the top and left borders to solid white, and the bottom and right borders to solid black. It mimicked the classic insert and outside of UI elements of the 90s software. For the window title bar, I put a linear gradient setting from a dark yellow to a lighter medium purple. Showing the odd story number requirement remains the focal point of the design. Finally, for the image container, I forced the width to 100% and utilize the image rendering pixelated, ready to give the image that authentic low resolution. To conclude, here is the final render result. As you can see, the model PHP and Antima provide a robust academic structure while the CIS successfully transformed it into an environmental interface that strictly adheres to the yellow color constraint. The text remains highly readable with proper justification and image perfectly fills its container without any upload coding. That concludes my presentation on the history of multimedia and for my multimedia development practical. Thank you for your time and